The wrench slipped from Roy's grease-stained fingers and bounced off the metal deck plate with a sharp clang that echoed through the cargo hold. He cursed under his breath and wiped the sweat from his forehead, leaving another dark smear across his weathered face. The cooling system on the rusty Comet had been acting up for 3 days now, and he was running out of patience and spare parts. At 42 years old, Roy had spent the better part of 2 decades drifting through frontier space, taking whatever salvage jobs and repair work kept fuel in his tanks and protein bars in his storage locker. The ship's ancient sensor array chose that moment to ping. Roy ignored it at first. Sensors gave false readings all the time out here near the Ashfall Nebula, where radiation and debris played tricks on equipment. But the ping came again, more insistent this time. Then a third time. Roy sighed and hauled himself up from the floor, his knees protesting the movement. He made his way to the cockpit, leaving a trail of oily boot prints behind him. The display screen showed a weak signal about 2 kilometers off his port side. Roy leaned closer, squinting at the readout. It was definitely a distress beacon, but the frequency was all wrong. Too organic somehow, pulsing in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat rather than the standard mechanical pulse of emergency transponders. He checked his fuel reserves. He had enough to investigate and still make it to Gateway Station for his next job, but only just barely. Common sense told him to ignore it. Distress beacons in debris fields were usually traps set by pirates or scavengers, but something about that strange pulse nagged at him. Roy had learned to trust his instincts over the years, even when they led him into trouble. He adjusted his trajectory and guided the rusty Comet toward the signal source. 20 minutes later, he found it. A small escape pod, maybe 3 meters long, tumbling slowly through a field of twisted metal and shattered hull plating. The wreckage around it looked recent, scorched black from weapons fire. Roy maneuvered his ship closer, using the external cameras to get a better look. The pod's hull was cracked in several places, and atmosphere was leaking from a seal that had nearly failed completely. Whatever was inside wouldn't last much longer. He brought the rusty Comet alongside the pod and extended the docking clamp. The magnetic lock engaged with a solid thunk that reverberated through the ship's frame. Roy grabbed his toolkit and made his way to the external hatch. His hands moved through the familiar routine of equalizing pressure and checking the seal integrity. The pod's door mechanism was damaged, so he had to use a manual override to get it open. The hatch swung inward with a hiss of escaping air. Roy's first thought was that he had found some kind of exotic cargo, maybe rare specimens being smuggled through frontier space. Then one of the specimens moved, and he realized with a jolt that he was looking at 2 living creatures huddled in the corner of the pod. They were small, definitely young, with scales that caught the light in shades of deep blue and green. Wings, torn and tattered, were folded tight against their backs. Their faces were vaguely reptilian, but with large eyes that held an unmistakably intelligent awareness. The larger of the 2, who came up to maybe Roy's waist if she had been standing, was wrapped protectively around the smaller one. Both of them stared at him with expressions of absolute terror. Roy froze. He had seen a lot of strange things in his years traveling through frontier space, but this was something else entirely. The larger one's lips moved, and a small voice spoke in broken Galactic Common, the trade language most species used for basic communication. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't sell us." The words hit Roy like a physical blow. These weren't cargo. They were children. Alien children, yes, but children nonetheless. He raised his hand slowly, trying to look non-threatening, though he knew his scarred face and oil-stained coveralls probably didn't help. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said carefully. "I picked up your distress signal. Do you need medical help?" The larger one didn't move, but her eyes tracked his every gesture. The smaller one peeked out from behind her protector, and Roy could see she was crying, silent tears running down scaled cheeks. "What happened to you?" Roy asked. "Where did you come from?" The larger one's grip tightened on her companion. "Smuggler ship," she said. "There was fighting, explosions. We escaped in the pod. Our kind. They think we're all dead. The authorities will take us away if they know. Please, we'll be quiet. We won't cause trouble. Just don't turn us in." Roy's mind raced. Smugglers meant illegal trafficking, probably of endangered or protected species. If these 2 had escaped from that kind of operation, they had good reason to be terrified of authorities. The galactic government had a poor track record when it came to protecting vulnerable beings. Too often, Rare survivors of extinct species ended up in research facilities or private collections, studied and displayed rather than helped. He thought of his daughter Iris, gone now for 8 years. She would have been about the same age as the larger one appeared to be. He remembered her laugh, the way she used to help him in his workshop back on the colony, handing him tools and asking endless questions about how things worked. Roy made a decision that he knew was probably stupid, possibly dangerous, and definitely complicated, but it was the only decision he could live with. "All right," he said quietly. "You can come aboard, just until I figure out what to do, but you follow my rules, understand? Don't touch anything unless I say so. Stay out of the engine room. And if I tell you to hide, you hide immediately, got it?" The larger one stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was a trick. Then slowly, carefully, she nodded. She helped the smaller one to her feet, and together they stepped out of the damaged pod and into Roy's ship. They moved with obvious pain, limping on injured legs, wings dragging. Roy sealed the hatch behind them and led them into the cargo bay. He cleared some space among the spare parts and salvage, pulling out an old emergency blanket and some cushions from storage. 'Twasn't much, but it was better than the cold metal floor. "Wait here," he told them. "I'll get you some water and food. Do you eat standard protein supplements?" The larger one nodded again. Roy headed to the small galley, his thoughts spinning. What had he just done? He was a mechanic, not a rescuer. He didn't have the resources to care for 2 alien children. He didn't even know what species they were or what they needed to stay healthy. But as he filled containers with water and grabbed nutrition bars from his limited supply, he couldn't shake the memory of those terrified eyes. They reminded him too much of Iris during the final days of the colony, when the attacks had started and everyone knew help wouldn't arrive in time. He returned to the cargo bay to find the two huddled together under the blanket, watching him approach with cautious hope. Roy set down the food and water and backed away to give them space. The smaller one reached for the water immediately, drinking in desperate gulps. The larger one ate more slowly, never taking her eyes off Roy. "What are your names?" he asked, sitting down on a crate across from them. The larger one hesitated, then replied, "I'm Lyra, this is my sister Pip." "I'm Roy," he said. "Welcome aboard the Rusty Comet. It's not much, but it's home." Pip finished her water and looked up at him. "Are you really not going to sell us?" Roy felt something twist in his chest. "No, kid. I'm not going to sell you. We'll figure this out together." He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but as he watched the tension slowly ease from their small frames, he knew he had made the right choice, even if it was the complicated one. 3 days into their unlikely arrangement, Roy discovered that Lyra had a fear of the dark that bordered on panic. He found this out the hard way when a power relay failed at 300 hours and plunged the entire ship into blackness. The screaming that erupted from the cargo bay sent him stumbling out of his bunk, half asleep and disoriented, fumbling for the emergency light on his belt. When he got the lights back on, he found both girls pressed into the far corner of the bay, Lyra holding Pip so tightly he worried she might hurt her little sister. Their scales, which he had learned could shift color slightly with their moods, had gone pale and dull. Lyra was breathing hard and Pip was sobbing quietly into her shoulder. "It's okay," Roy said, keeping his voice calm and level. "Just a blown relay. Happens all the time on old ships. We're safe." Lyra's eyes were wild, unfocused. "The fire," she whispered. "When the ships came, everything burning. Couldn't see. Couldn't breathe. Mother said run and we ran, but everything was dark and burning and—" "Hey," Roy interrupted gently. He sat down on the floor a safe distance away. "You're not there anymore. You're on my ship. Nothing's burning. See, just a power glitch. I'll fix it in the morning." It took almost an hour for them to calm down enough to sleep again. Roy ended up leaving the cargo bay lights on low and giving them his spare emergency lamp. When he finally crawled back into his own bunk, he lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wondering what kind of hell these kids had survived. The next morning, he started teaching them about the ship. Not because he particularly wanted helpers, but because he figured if they understood how things worked, maybe they would be less afraid when something inevitably broke down again. Lyra proved to be a quick learner with an unexpected aptitude for mechanical systems. She watched intently as he explained the life support monitors, her head tilted in concentration. When he showed her the color coding system for the various ship controls, She nodded seriously and repeated everything back to him with careful precision. Red means danger or emergency systems, she recited. Yellow means caution or maintenance required. Green means normal operation. Blue is for navigation and sensors. Don't touch anything red unless Roy says so. Pip was less interested in the technical aspects but had discovered Roy's small greenhouse pod, a luxury he had installed years ago when he still harbored dreams of settling down somewhere. She spent hours there, carefully touching the leaves of the tomato plants and herbs, whispering to them in her own language. Roy caught her singing to the plants once, a strange harmonic sound that seemed to come from her chest rather than her throat. The plants seemed to lean toward her when she did it. "Your sister likes the garden," Roy commented to Lyra one afternoon as they worked together on replacing a worn bearing in the coolant pump. Lyra glanced toward the greenhouse pod and smiled slightly, the first real smile he had seen from her. "Our mother grew things before. Pip remembers helping her, I think. Or maybe she just remembers the stories I told her about it." Roy handed her a wrench. "How old were you when it happened?" 6 cycles. About 7 of your years, I think. Pip was only 3. Lyra's scales dimmed slightly. "I remember more than she does. Sometimes I wish I didn't." They worked in silence for a while. Roy showed her how to tighten the seal without over-torquing the bolts. She mimicked his movements exactly, her small clawed fingers surprisingly deft with the tools. "You're good at this," Roy said. "Natural talent." Lyra's scales brightened just a bit. Really. You've got good spatial reasoning and steady hands. That's half of what makes a decent mechanic." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Roy would wake first, check the ship's systems, and start a pot of actual coffee, one of his few remaining luxuries. Lyra would emerge from the cargo bay shortly after, now helping Pip get cleaned up and ready for the day. They had moved beyond the emergency, rations to synthesized meals that Roy programmed to match. What little information he could find about Drakari dietary needs in the ship's outdated database, breakfast, became a shared affair around the small galley table. Pip would chatter about her dreams or the plants, while Lyra listened and occasionally corrected her little sister's grammar in Galactic Common. Roy mostly ate in silence, but he found himself listening to their conversations with something that might have been contentment. One morning, Pip looked up from her food and asked, "Roy, why do you live alone?" The question caught him off guard. Lyra shot her sister a warning look, but Roy shook his head. "It's okay. Fair question." He set down his fork. "I had a family once. A daughter. Her name was Iris. She died 8 years ago when the colony where we lived was attacked." Pip's eyes went wide. "Like our home?" "Similar. Different enemy, same result. After that, I just couldn't stay anywhere with people. Too many memories. So I bought this ship and started moving." Lyra was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Do you still miss her?" "Every day," Roy admitted. He looked at the 2 small faces watching him and found himself continuing. "She used to help me in my workshop. She'd hand me tools and ask questions about everything. Drove me crazy sometimes, but I'd give anything to have her bothering me again." Pip reached across the table and patted his hand with her small, clawed one. "We're sorry your daughter died." Roy's throat tightened. "Yeah, me too, kid." The touching moment was interrupted by an alarm from the cockpit. Roy checked the display and saw they were approaching a scheduled checkpoint. He quickly ushered both girls into a hidden compartment he had built into the cargo bay, a smuggler's hold from the ship's previous owner that he had never bothered to remove. "Stay quiet," he instructed. "Don't make any sound until I come back for you." The inspection was routine, just a board patrol officer checking his manifest and cargo. Roy kept his answers short and his expression neutral, the way he had learned to do over years of avoiding attention. The officer never suspected there was anything unusual aboard, and 20 minutes later Roy was releasing the girls from their hiding spot. Lyra stumbled out, looking shaken. "I don't like hiding." "I know," Roy said, "but it keeps you safe. People are looking for Drakari survivors. Some want to study you, some want to own you like possessions, and some just want to finish what was started on your homeworld. Until I figure out something better, hiding is how we stay ahead of them." That evening, as Roy worked on updating the ship's navigation charts, he felt a small presence at his elbow. Pip was standing there holding one of his old data pads. She had been drawing on it, he realized. Crude pictures of stars and ships, and in the center, 3 stick figures standing together. "Is that us?" he asked. Pip nodded. That's you and Lyra and me. We're on your ship. Roy studied the drawing. The three figures were holding hands or claws, whatever the digital equivalent was. Can I keep this? He asked. Pip's face lit up. Really? You want to keep my picture? Yeah, it's good. I'll put it on my wall. After Pip went back to join her sister, Roy did exactly that. He transferred the image to his quarters and set it as the display on the small screen above his bunk. It was the first decoration he had put up in 8 years of living on this ship. Later that night, he heard soft sounds from the cargo bay. He went to investigate and found both girls curled together in a makeshift nest they had built from blankets and cushions. They were asleep, but even in sleep, Lyra kept one arm wrapped protectively around Pip. Roy stood there for a long moment, watching them breathe. He had told himself this was temporary, that he would find them someplace safe and then go back to his solitary existence. But looking at them now, seeing how Pip's scales had brightened to a healthier color and how Lyra had started to relax her constant vigilance, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe temporary could last a little longer. Maybe he could handle the company for a while. Maybe having people depending on him again wasn't the worst thing that could happen. He adjusted the blanket that had slipped off Pip's shoulder and dimmed the lights to a soft glow, the way he had learned they preferred. As he returned to his own quarters, he caught himself thinking about modifications he could make to give them a proper room instead of camping in the cargo bay. The thought should have scared him. Instead, it just made him check his account balance and start calculating costs. Gateway Station loomed ahead like a small metal moon, bristling with docking ports and communication arrays. Roy felt his stomach tighten as he guided the rusty comet through the approach vector. He had been avoiding populated stations since picking up his 2 unexpected passengers, but his supplies were running critically low, and he had a repair job waiting that would pay enough to keep them going for another 2 months. Behind him in the cockpit, Lyra and Pip sat strapped into the fold-down jump seats he had installed last week. Both girls wore simple worker coveralls he had modified to accommodate their tails and wings, and their scales were hidden as much as possible under the fabric. Around their necks hung the forged identification chips he had purchased from a not-quite-legal contact at the last station. Remember what I told you, Roy said without turning around. You're registered as indentured workers doing their service term. Lots of species do it for passage or training. Nobody will look twice if you stay quiet and keep your heads down. We remember, Lyra said. Her voice was steady, but Roy could see her reflection in the cockpit glass. She was gripping the armrests hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale. The docking procedure went smoothly enough. Roy paid the berthing fees and led the girls down the access ramp into the organized chaos of Gateway Station. The main concourse was packed with dozens of species going about their business, speaking in a dozen languages, wearing 100 different styles of clothing. The air smelled of strange foods and recycled atmosphere and too many bodies in too small a space. Pip pressed close to Roy's side, her eyes huge. A group of tall insectoid traders passed by, their chittering language echoing off the metal walls, and she flinched. Roy felt her small hand grab a fistful of his jacket. It's all right, he murmured. Just keep walking. Stay close. They made it halfway to the market district before the trouble started. Roy was checking his list of needed supplies when he felt eyes on him. He glanced up and locked gazes with a hulking figure leaning against a support pillar. The alien was Kragan, a species known for working as enforcers and muscle for various criminal syndicates. This one had the tattoos that marked him as syndicate-affiliated. The Kragan's eyes traveled from Roy to the 2 girls, then back again. Recognition sparked in those cold eyes. He pushed off from the pillar and started walking parallel to them, matching their pace. Roy's hand moved to the plasma cutter on his belt, a tool that could double as a weapon in a pinch. Keep walking, he told the girls quietly. Don't look at him. But the Kragan was already moving to intercept them. He planted himself directly in their path, forcing them to stop. Up close, he was even more intimidating, easily 7 feet tall with arms thick as cargo containers. Interesting companions you have there, human, the Kragan said in heavily accented common. His voice rumbled like rocks grinding together. Very interesting indeed. Roy kept his expression neutral. They're workers. Registered and legal. Check the chips if you want. The Kragan smiled, revealing rows of pointed teeth. Oh, I believe they're registered. Question is, does their registration match what they really are? He leaned closer, studying Lyra and Pip with undisguised interest. You see, I know what Drakari look like. Studied them in my youth before they all supposedly died. Shame about that, really. Beautiful species. Here now. Valuable. We're going to be late for a meeting, Roy said flatly. Excuse us. He tried to move past, but the Kragan shifted to block them again. Here's the thing, human. Extinct species that turn out to be not quite extinct fetch remarkable prices from certain collectors. Private museums, research facilities, the kind of credits that could set a man up for life. Roy's fingers closed around the plasma cutter. Touch them and you're violating guild labor laws. That brings heat nobody wants. The Kragan laughed, a sound like an avalanche. Guild laws only apply if someone reports it. And who's going to report anything? You? He took a step forward. I'm thinking we can make a deal. 50-50 split. You clearly found them, that's worth something. But I have the buyers. We both walk away rich. Before Roy could respond, Lyra stepped forward. Her head barely reached the Kragan's chest, but she stared up at him with blazing eyes. We're not for sale, she said clearly. We're not anyone's property. The Kragan reached for her with one massive hand. It was a mistake. Lyra's mouth opened and a gout of flame shot out. Not large, but hot enough that the Kragan jerked back with a startled curse. His hand was singed, smoke rising from burned skin. For a moment, everyone in the immediate area froze. Then chaos erupted. Aliens scattered, some shouting an alarm, others just trying to get away from potential danger. Alarms started blaring. The Kragan's shock turned to rage and he lunged forward. Roy yanked the plasma cutter from his belt and triggered it, positioning himself between the Kragan and the girls. The bright blue cutting flame extended from the tool's tip, painting everything in harsh light. They're mine, Roy said, his voice dead calm despite his racing heart. You don't touch them. You don't come near them. And if you try, I'll cut you apart piece by piece. Are we clear? The Kragan hesitated. He was bigger and stronger, but the plasma cutter could slice through hull plating. A crowd had formed, and station security would arrive any second. The Kragan's eyes narrowed. This isn't over, human. You can't protect them forever. Sooner or later, security alert, a mechanical voice announced over the station's speakers. All personnel clear the area. Security responding to unauthorized weapons discharge. The Kragan backed away, pointing one burned finger at Roy. You're making a big mistake. I'll remember your face. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd. Roy grabbed both girls by the shoulders and steered them quickly in the opposite direction, ducking into a maintenance corridor he had mapped out earlier. They hurried through the narrow passages, emerging 3 levels down in the industrial section where the repair shops were located. Roy didn't stop until they were inside a small workshop run by an old acquaintance, a human woman named Patricia, who asked few questions and kept her mouth shut. She looked up from the engine part she was working on and raised an eyebrow at Roy's expression. Trouble? She asked. Always is on Gateway, Roy replied. He turned to the girls who were both shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. You two okay? Lyra nodded stiffly. Pip looked like she might cry. Roy knelt down to their level. That was good thinking with the fire, he told Lyra. Surprised him. Gave us time to get away. But now we have a problem. That Kragan knows what you are and he's not going to give up. I'm sorry, Lyra whispered. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just didn't want him to touch Pip. You did exactly right, Roy said firmly. Protecting your sister is always the right call. I'm not mad. I'm just saying we need to move fast now. He stood and turned to Patricia. I need supplies and I need them quick. Can you handle the list while I finish your cooling system repair? I'll throw in an extra service for free if you can have everything loaded in an hour. Patricia looked at the 3 of them, her gaze lingering on the girls. She was smart enough to put pieces together. But she just nodded. 1 hour. But Roy, if you're in the kind of trouble I think you're in, you should consider getting farther out than Gateway. Frontier stations ask fewer questions. Already planning on it, Roy said. The next hour passed in tense efficiency. Roy worked faster than he ever had, his hands moving through repairs with practiced speed while his mind raced through contingency plans. The girls sat in Patricia's office, quiet and subdued. Through the window, Roy could see Pip leaning against her sister, while Lyra kept watch like a small soldier on duty. When the supplies were loaded and Patricia transferred the payment for his work, Roy paused at the door. Thanks for not asking questions. Patricia shrugged. We all have our reasons for being out here. I figure you have yours. She glanced at the girls. They're lucky to have you. Roy wasn't sure about that, but he nodded anyway. They made their way back to the rusty Comet through service corridors and cargo routes, avoiding the main concourses. Roy didn't relax until they were sealed inside and running through the undocking sequence. As they pulled away from Gateway Station, Pip finally broke down crying. Lyra held her, making soft crooning sounds in their native language. Roy focused on navigating through the busy traffic lanes, but part of him was listening to that sound, recognizing it as the same thing his mother used to do when he was young and scared. When they reached clear space, Roy engaged the autopilot and turned his chair around to face them. Both girls looked exhausted, their scales dull with stress. "I want to try something," Roy said. "I can drop you at a colony. Find a family who would take you in, people who could give you a normal life, or as normal as it gets out here. You'd have other kids around, proper beds, schools maybe." Lyra met his eyes. "Would we be safe there?" Roy hesitated. Honesty had always been his policy. Safer than on a salvage ship with one man and a broken-down cooling system. "But I can't guarantee anything. The galaxy isn't a safe place, especially for your kind. Would we be together?" Pip asked in a small voice. "I'd make sure of it," Roy promised. The girls looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that siblings can have. Then Lyra turned back to Roy. "Can we think about it?" she asked. "Not decide right now?" Roy felt relief flood through him and realized with a start that he had been hoping they would say no. "Yeah, take your time. We've got a few days before we need to make any decisions." That night, Roy found Pip's drawing still displayed above his bunk, 3 stick figures holding hands. He stared at it for a long time before finally letting himself acknowledge the truth. Somewhere between the rescue and now, he had stopped thinking about them as cargo or even as refugees. He was thinking about them as his responsibility, his crew, his kids. The days bled into weeks and the weeks into months. Roy stopped counting after the first 60 days. The rusty Comet felt different now, less like a lonely shell he inhabited and more like an actual home. Small changes accumulated like dust. Pip's drawings covered one wall of the galley. Lyra had organized his tool locker with an efficiency that put his previous system to shame. The greenhouse pod flourished under Pip's obsessive care, producing more vegetables than they could actually eat. They had settled into something that resembled a routine, though calling it normal would have been pushing it. Roy woke each morning to the sound of Lyra helping Pip get washed up in the tiny refresher. They ate breakfast together, discussing the day's work or arguing about what to synthesize for dinner. Lyra spent her mornings learning mechanics and ship systems, while Pip tended her plants and drew elaborate pictures of stars and nebulas she created from memory and imagination. Roy found himself explaining things he had never thought about before. Why did humans shake hands as greetings? What were birthdays and why did people celebrate them? Why did he curse at stubborn bolts when they clearly couldn't hear him? The questions were endless and sometimes exhausting, but he answered them as best he could. One afternoon, while replacing a worn actuator in the starboard maneuvering thruster, Lyra asked him about families. "Did you have siblings?" she asked, holding a light so he could see into the access panel. "One brother," Roy said, grunting as he twisted a particularly stubborn connector loose. "Older than me. He stayed on Earth, became a doctor. Haven't talked to him in years, why not?" Roy was silent for a moment, considering his answer. "After Iris died, I couldn't be around family. Everyone looked at me with pity or tried to make me feel better. I just wanted to be left alone. So I left and never went back." "Do you regret it?" Lyra asked quietly. "Sometimes. But I made my choices. Can't unmake them now." He pulled the old actuator free and reached for the replacement. "Hand me the new one?" Lyra passed him the part with her usual precision. She had learned to anticipate what he needed before he asked for it, a skill that made their work together flow smoothly. "In Drakari culture," she said slowly, "family is everything. The greatest shame is to be alone without clan or kin. When our world died, we didn't just lose our people. We lost our entire way of understanding ourselves." Roy paused in his work. "That why you protect Pip so fiercely? She's all I have left of our family. Our mother made me promise to take care of her. It was the last thing she said before she pushed us into the escape pod." Lyra's voice wavered slightly. "I'm all Pip has too. If something happens to me, she'll be completely alone." Roy installed the new actuator and began securing it in place. "Nothing's going to happen to you. I'll make sure of it. You can't promise that. You're not invincible." That Kragan at Gateway Station could have killed you, but he didn't, and I'm still here. Roy sealed the panel and backed out of the access port. He sat on the deck and looked at Lyra seriously. Listen to me. As long as you're on this ship, you're both under my protection. That means something. I don't make promises I can't keep, and I'm promising you that I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. Lyra's scales shifted to a warmer hue. A sign he had learned meant she was feeling emotional. Why do you care about us? We're not your species. We're not your problem. Roy was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, when Iris died, I thought my life as a parent was over. Thought I'd never care about anyone like that again. Didn't want to, honestly. It hurt too much. He looked at the tool in his hands, turning it over absently. But you two showed up in that escape pod and something changed. At first I told myself it was temporary. But temporary became a month, then 2 months. And somewhere along the way I stopped thinking about when I'd find you a new home and started thinking about how to make this one work better for you. So we're your project? Lyra asked. Like fixing the ship? Roy smiled slightly. No, you're not a project. You're just you, and somewhere along the way this stopped being just my ship and became our ship. He stood and offered her his hand. She took it and he pulled her to her feet. Come on, I want to show you something. He led her to a sealed section of the cargo bay he had been working on for weeks. Lyra had asked about it several times, but he had always deflected the questions. Now he opened the door and gestured for her to look inside. The small room had been transformed. 2 bunks built into the wall, each with storage underneath. A small desk with 2 chairs. Soft lighting that could be adjusted. The walls were bare metal, but he had primed them ready for painting. It's not fancy, Roy said, but I figured you and Pip deserved actual beds instead of sleeping in the cargo bay. There's even a door for privacy. He pointed to another door. And I converted that old storage closet into a proper refresher just for you two. Still small, but it's yours. Lyra walked into the room slowly, running her hand along one of the bunks. Her scales were glowing faintly now. That bioluminescence he had learned indicated strong positive emotions. You built this for us? Took me a while. Had to do it in pieces so you wouldn't notice. Pip helped me pick out the paint colors, actually. She's been in on the secret for 2 weeks now. Surprised she managed not to tell you. Roy leaned against the doorframe. Happy naming day, by the way. Lyra turned to stare at him. What? I looked up Drakari customs. You have naming days instead of birthdays, right? The day you got your adult name in the clan ceremony? I asked you about it a few months ago, remember? You said yours was approaching, but you didn't remember the exact date, so I picked one. He pulled out a small wrapped package. Made Pip help me with this too. Lyra took the package with shaking hands and unwrapped it. Inside was a leather tool belt, sized for her smaller frame, with her name engraved on the buckle in both Galactic Common and Drakari script. The belt already held a basic set of mechanics tools. Every good mechanic needs their own tools, Roy said. These are yours now. You've earned them. Lyra clutched the belt to her chest and made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Before Roy could react, she had crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce hug. He froze for a moment, then awkwardly patted her shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for everything. For saving us. For teaching me. For not giving up on us. Yeah, well, Roy said, his voice rough. You're good kids. Someone had to look out for you. They stood like that for a moment before Pip's voice came from behind them. Can I see now? Roy said I had to wait until Lyra saw it first. Roy pulled back and nodded. Pip rushed in, squealing with delight when she saw the room. She immediately claimed the top bunk and started explaining to Lyra why it was obviously the superior sleeping location. Lyra laughed and argued back, and Roy watched them with something warm and uncomfortable settling in his chest. That evening, after the girls had moved their few belongings into the new room, and Pip had fallen asleep clutching one of her plant seedlings, Lyra found Roy in the cockpit. He was checking their course and sipping coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Can I ask you something? Lyra said, sure. Earlier you said our ship instead of my ship. Did you mean that? Roy set down his mug and turned to face her. Yeah, I meant it. This is your home as much as mine now. Maybe more since you actually keep it clean. Lyra fidgeted with her new tool belt, which she was still wearing. Among Drakari, there's a ceremony. When someone without clan is taken in by another family, there are words that get spoken, a promise and an acceptance, and she looked up at him. I don't expect you to know our customs or follow them, but I wanted to tell you that in my heart I've already spoken those words. You saved our lives and you've given us more than just shelter. You've given us purpose and learning and safety. In every way that matters, you're our family now. Roy felt something in his chest tighten. He thought about Iris, about how she used to call him Dad with such casual certainty. He thought about the 8 years he had spent alone, convincing himself he was better off that way. He looked at Lyra standing there, this alien child who had somehow become part of his life, and he realized the truth. I'm not good at this, he said finally. The family thing. I'll mess up. I'll say the wrong things. I won't know what to do when things get hard. None of us are good at it, Lyra said. We're making it up as we go, but we're doing it together. That's what matters, Roy nodded slowly. Okay, then yes. This is our ship. You're my crew, my responsibility. He paused, then added quietly, my family. Lyra's scales glowed so brightly she lit up the entire cockpit. She smiled, and Roy found himself smiling back. It felt strange on his face after so many years of maintaining a neutral expression. But not bad. Different, but not bad. Does this mean we can finally paint the exterior? Lyra asked. Because Pip and I have ideas, and some of them are actually good. Roy laughed, a sound he hadn't made in longer than he could remember. We'll see. No promises. And if you're thinking of painting it bright pink, the answer is absolutely not. What about purple with stars? We'll negotiate. Later, as Roy lay in his bunk staring at Pip's drawing on his wall, he thought about how much his life had changed in just a few months. He was responsible for 2 alien children in a galaxy that wanted to exploit them. He had turned his quiet, solitary existence into something complicated and messy and difficult. And for the first time in 8 years, he didn't feel like he was just surviving anymore. He felt like he was living. The message came through on an old military frequency that Roy hadn't used in over a decade. He was running a diagnostic on the sensor array when the encrypted signal popped up on his display, marked with a priority code that made his stomach drop. Only one person still had access to this channel, and Roy had hoped never to hear from him again. He routed the message to his private terminal and entered the decryption key from memory. Admiral Nicholas Cross appeared on the screen, older than Roy remembered, but with the same sharp eyes that missed nothing. The Admiral was in civilian clothes, which meant this was personal rather than official business. That didn't make Roy feel any better. Roy, Cross said without preamble, we need to talk about your passengers. Roy closed the connection and sat back, his mind racing. How had Cross found out? He had been so careful. They had avoided major stations, used false registries, kept the girls hidden whenever they encountered other ships. But Cross had always been thorough, and if he was reaching out, it meant Roy's secret was no longer secret. The terminal beeped. Another message, this one text only. I know you're there. I know what you're carrying, and I know you're in more danger than you realize. Meet me at the coordinates attached. Come alone or don't come at all. You have 48 hours. Roy stared at the message for a long time. Every instinct told him this was a trap, that meeting Cross would be the end of everything. But Cross had saved his life twice during the colony wars, and had been the one to help Roy disappear afterward when the questions about what happened became too heavy. If anyone in the military chain could be trusted, it was Cross. But could Roy risk the girls' safety on that trust? He found them in the greenhouse pod. Lyra was helping Pip repot a tomato plant that had outgrown its container, both of them covered in dirt and laughing about something. They looked happy, healthy. The hunted, terrified creatures from the escape pod were gone, replaced by these 2 bright-eyed children who argued about proper watering schedules and debated whether the ship's exterior should be painted blue or green. We need to talk, Roy said. Both girls looked up, and their smiles faded at his expression. Lyra set down the plant carefully. What's wrong? Roy told them about the message. He kept his voice level and explained the situation as clearly as he could. When he finished, Lyra's scales had gone pale and Pip had moved to hide behind her sister. What are you going to do? Lyra asked. I don't know yet. Cross was a good man when I knew him, but that was a long time ago. People change. But if he already knows about you, that means others might know too. We're not as hidden as I thought we were. Maybe we should run, Pip said quietly. Find somewhere far away where nobody knows us. There's nowhere that far, Roy said. The galaxy is smaller than it seems. If Cross found us, others will too. He looked at Lyra. What do you think? Lyra straightened. That habit she had of trying to look older and more capable whenever she was scared. I think we need to know what he wants. Why he's contacting you. If he wanted to turn us in, he could have sent soldiers instead of a message. Roy nodded slowly. That's what I was thinking. But if I go meet him, I'm leaving you two alone on the ship. That means you need to be ready to run if things go wrong. We can handle it, Lyra said with more confidence than she probably felt. You've taught me enough to fly the ship. Not well, but enough to get away. Over the next 2 days, Roy prepared for every contingency he could think of. He programmed emergency routes into the navigation computer and showed Lyra how to engage them with a single command. He left detailed instructions for what to do if he didn't come back, including contacts who might help and places they could hide. He moved his entire credit account into a chip that Lyra could access. The night before the meeting, he couldn't sleep. He found himself in the galley at 0200 hours, staring at a cold cup of coffee and thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Footsteps behind him announced Lyra's arrival before she spoke. Can't sleep either? She asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Too much thinking. Me too. Lyra was quiet for a moment, then said, If something happens tomorrow, if you don't come back, I want you to know that you gave us something we thought we'd lost forever. You gave us hope. And family. Whatever happens, we'll remember that. Roy's throat tightened. Nothing's going to happen. I'll meet with Cross, hear what he has to say, and come back. We'll figure out the next step together. But if something does, it won't. Lyra reached across the table and took his hand. Her claws were carefully retracted, her scaled skin warm against his. Thank you for everything, Roy, for being our family. Roy squeezed her hand gently. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The meeting coordinates led to a small moon orbiting a gas giant in an uninhabited system. Roy took a shuttle down alone, leaving the rusty comet in orbit with Lyra at the controls and strict instructions not to land no matter what. As he descended through the thin atmosphere, he could see a single ship already on the surface, a sleek military courier that looked fast and well armed. Cross was waiting at the base of the landing ramp, alone as promised. He was grayer than in the message, his face lined with years of hard decisions. But his posture was still military straight and his eyes were alert as Roy approached. You look like hell, Cross said by way of greeting. You look old, Roy replied. Cross smiled slightly. Time does that. Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either. Talk fast, Admiral. I've got 2 kids waiting for me who are probably panicking right now. That's what I want to talk about. Cross pulled out a data pad and handed it to Roy. This is everything we know about the Drakari survivors. It's not classified anymore because officially the information doesn't exist. Roy looked at the files. There were reports, intelligence assessments, and surveillance data. Dozens of agencies and organizations were looking for Drakari survivors. Some wanted them for research. Others wanted them as proof that the genocide had been incomplete. A few wanted them dead to finish the job, and some, like the Syndicate, just wanted them for profit. The Covenant Alliance is actively hunting for any survivors, Cross said. They can't afford to have evidence of their war crimes walking around. You've been lucky so far, but that luck won't last. Sooner or later, someone's going to find you, and when they do, those kids won't survive the encounter. So what are you suggesting? Roy asked. That I turn them over to you? Let the military lock them up for protection? No, I'm suggesting something better. Cross pulled up another file. There's a research station in the Outer Rim completely off the books. It was set up by a coalition of scientists who wanted to preserve what they could of extinct species. They have resources, security, and people who actually care about these beings. They could help your girls. Teach them about their heritage, help them grow up safely, maybe even find other survivors if any exist. And in exchange? Nothing. They don't work for any government or corporation. They're funded by private donors who believe some things are more important than politics. Cross looked at Roy seriously. I've visited the station. I've met the people there. They're good people doing good work. Your girls would have a chance at a real life there. Education, medical care, other children to play with. Things you can't give them on a salvage ship. Roy felt something cold settle in his stomach. You want me to give them up? I want you to give them a future, Cross said gently. I saw the surveillance footage from Gateway Station. That Kragan knows what they are and he's connected. Word is spreading. Right now you're just a target. Soon you'll be a target with a bounty. And every hunter in 3 sectors will be looking for you. How long can you protect them when that happens? Roy wanted to argue, but Cross was right. He had been thinking the same thing for weeks now, trying to figure out how to keep them safe in a galaxy that wanted to exploit them. On his own, with limited resources and a ship that barely held together, he could only do so much. Would they be together? Roy asked. Lyra and Pip? Yes, and you could visit. It's not a prison. It's a sanctuary. Cross put his hand on Roy's shoulder. I know what you're thinking. I know you've gotten attached. But you have to ask yourself what's really best for them. Is it staying with you, living on the run, always in danger? Or is it giving them a chance to grow up in peace? Roy looked up at the sky where the rusty comet was orbiting. He thought about Lyra learning to use her tools, about Pip singing to her plants. He thought about the makeshift family they had built together, imperfect and strange but real. I need to think about it, he said finally. And I need to talk to them. They get a say in this. Fair enough. But Roy, think fast. The window for getting them to safety is closing. Every day you wait is another day someone might find you. Roy took the datapad with the station's coordinates and information. He flew back to his ship in silence, his mind churning. When he docked, both girls were waiting in the bay, their faces anxious. What did he say? Lyra asked immediately. Roy sat down on a cargo crate and told them everything. He didn't sugarcoat it or try to make the decision for them. He laid out the facts and the options as clearly as he could. When he finished, Pip was crying. You're sending us away? I'm not sending you anywhere, Roy said firmly. I'm telling you what your options are. If you want to stay, we stay together and figure this out. But you need to know what that means. More running. More hiding. More danger. Lyra's face was unreadable. And at this station, we'd be safe? Cross thinks so. And he's not a man who lies easily. But we wouldn't be with you. Roy's chest ached. No, you wouldn't. The silence stretched between them, heavy and painful. Finally, Lyra said, Can we have time to think about it? To decide together? Of course. Take all the time you need. But as Roy watched them retreat to their room, holding hands and whispering to each other, he knew that whatever they decided, nothing would ever be the same again. The simple life they had built together was already slipping away, and all the wanting in the world couldn't hold it in place. The girls didn't come out of their room for hours. Roy busied himself with unnecessary maintenance tasks, checking systems that didn't need checking, organizing tool drawers that were already organized. Anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from circling the same painful thoughts over and over. Around midday, he heard their door open and looked up to find them standing in the corridor. Lyra's scales were dull, her eyes red from crying. Pip clutched her sister's hand like a lifeline. They walked into the cargo bay where Roy was pretending to inspect a power coupling. We want to talk to you, Lyra said, her voice steady despite everything. Roy set down his tools and gave them his full attention. I'm listening. We've been thinking about what you said, about the research station and being safe. Lyra took a breath, and we understand why you think it might be better for us. But Roy, we don't want to go. This is our home. You're our family. We don't care about danger or running or hiding. We just want to stay together. Pip nodded vigorously. Please don't make us leave. We'll be better. We'll hide better. We'll... The ship's proximity alarm cut her off with a shrill beep. Roy's blood went cold. He wasn't expecting any traffic in this sector. He ran to the cockpit with both girls right behind him, and what he saw on the display made his heart sink. 3 ships were approaching fast. Not military vessels or civilian transports. These were Hunter-class frigates, the kind used by syndicate enforcement teams. They were already within weapons range and their targeting systems were active. Get to your room and seal the door, Roy snapped, his hands already moving across the controls. Now. Roy, what's happening? Lyra demanded. They found us. Don't argue, just go. The girls ran. Roy brought the engines online and fired the maneuvering thrusters, trying to get some distance between them and the incoming ships. A warning shot scorched past the rusty comet's bow, close enough that the heat shields registered the near miss. An incoming transmission demanded his attention. Roy accepted it and found himself looking at a Kragan face he recognized. The enforcer from Gateway Station. Hello, human. the Kragan said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Remember me? I told you this wasn't over. Now power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Hand over the Drakari and maybe I'll let you live." Roy killed the transmission and pushed the engines to maximum. The rusty Comet wasn't built for combat or speed, but she had some tricks. He had spent years modifying her systems, adding redundancies and overrides that most mechanics would call insane. Now those modifications were all that stood between them and capture. The 3 hunter ships pursued, firing shots meant to disable rather than destroy. They wanted the cargo intact. Roy weaved between debris fields and asteroid clusters, using every bit of his knowledge to stay ahead. But the hunter ships were faster, better armed, and closing the gap. "Roy," Lyra's voice came through the internal comm. "We're coming to help. Stay in your room," Roy shouted back, jerking the ship sideways to avoid another weapons burst. But the girls were already in the cockpit. Lyra slid into the co-pilot seat while Pip strapped into the jump seat behind them. "Tell us what to do," Lyra said with fierce determination. Roy didn't have time to argue. "Pip, monitor the shield levels and call out any critical drops. Lyra, I need you to reroute power from non-essential systems to the engines. Can you do that?" "Yes," Lyra said, her hands already moving across the controls he had taught her to use. They worked together with desperate efficiency, Roy piloting while Lyra managed the ship's power distribution, and Pip kept track of damage. The rusty Comet shuddered under near misses, alarms blaring as systems strained past their limits. One of the hunter ships pulled alongside, trying to match their course for boarding. "They're extending their docking clamp," Pip reported, her voice high with fear. Roy made a split-second decision. He cut the main engines completely and fired the emergency retro thrusters, causing the rusty Comet to decelerate so suddenly that inertial dampeners screamed in protest. The hunter ship shot past them, unable to adjust in time. Roy immediately fired the main engines again and changed course 90 degrees, heading deeper into the asteroid field. "That won't work twice," Lyra said, her scales flickering with stress. She was right. The hunter ships had recovered and were closing in again, this time coordinating their approach to cut off escape routes. Roy's mind raced through options and found nothing good. They couldn't outrun these ships. They couldn't outfight them. And in minutes, maybe seconds, they would be caught. Then Pip said something that changed everything. "Roy, I can help." "Lyra and I both can." "What are you talking about?" Roy demanded, spinning the ship to avoid another weapons burst. "The fire, our bioluminescence. All Drakari have a connection to energy. Mother told Lyra about it before." Pip's voice trailed off. "We can overcharge the shields, give you more power, but we have to be at the main power coupling." "That's in engineering," Roy said. "You'll be exposed if the hull breaches." "We're out of options," Lyra said firmly. She was already unstrapping from her seat. "Tell us what to do." Roy wanted to refuse, to keep them safe in the cockpit where he could see them. But she was right. They were out of options and time. "The main coupling is marked in red. Put your hands on the transfer nodes and channel whatever energy you can through them. But if I tell you to stop, you stop immediately. Understand?" Both girls nodded and ran toward engineering. Roy focused on keeping the ship intact, while his sensors showed the hunter vessels closing in for the final approach. Then suddenly his power readout spiked. The shields jumped from 30% to 80%, then kept climbing. Engine output increased. Weapons that Roy didn't even have suddenly showed online as the power surge activated backup systems he had forgotten existed. Through the internal camera, he could see the girls in engineering, their hands pressed against the transfer nodes, their scales glowing so brightly they hurt to look at. Energy was flowing from them directly into the ship's systems, a bioelectric current that shouldn't have been possible but somehow was. Roy didn't waste the opportunity. With the additional power, the rusty Comet became a different ship. He accelerated hard, weaving through the asteroid field with a precision that the hunter ships couldn't match. One of them clipped an asteroid and spun out of control. The other two continued pursuit but were falling behind. "Keep it up," Roy called to the girls. "Just a little longer." But through the camera, he could see them struggling. The glow was starting to flicker. Pip was shaking, and even Lyra's determined expression was cracking. Roy knew they couldn't maintain this output much longer. He made a decision. Ahead was a massive asteroid with deep canyons cutting through its surface. Roy aimed directly for the narrowest canyon, barely wide enough for the rusty Comet to fit through. The hunter ships broke off, unwilling to risk the tight passage. As soon as they entered the canyon, Roy cut the power draw from the girls. "Stop, let go now." The energy flow cut off and both girls collapsed. Roy set the autopilot to maintain course through the canyon and ran back to engineering. He found them on the deck, their scales so dim they looked almost gray. They were breathing but barely conscious. "I've got you," Roy said, gathering them both in his arms. They weighed almost nothing. He carried them to their room and laid them on their bunks, covering them with blankets. Pip's hand found Lyra's across the gap between beds, and they held on to each other even in their exhausted state. Roy stayed with them, monitoring their vital signs on his medical scanner and adjusting the environment controls to optimal levels. Slowly, over the next hour, color returned to their scales. Their breathing evened out. Finally, Pip's eyes fluttered open. "Did we make it?" she whispered. "We made it," Roy confirmed. "You both saved our lives. That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. Don't ever do anything like that again." Lyra stirred and managed a weak smile. "But it worked." "It worked," Roy admitted. He checked his sensors. The hunter ships had given up the pursuit, probably assuming they had lost their prey in the asteroid field. "We're safe for now." He sat with them until they had recovered enough to sit up and drink water. They were weak but healing fast, their natural resilience already repairing whatever damage channeling that much energy had done. As they sipped water and slowly ate nutrition bars, Roy made his choice. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about the research station, about what's best for you, and I was wrong." Both girls looked at him with wide eyes. Roy continued, "I thought keeping you safe meant sending you somewhere with resources and security and other people. But today proved something to me. We work together. We protect each other. That's what family does. And I'm not going to break up this family because I'm scared of what might happen." "Really?" Pip asked, her voice hopeful. "We can stay?" "If you want to, but things need to change. We can't keep running blind. We need to be smarter, better prepared, and we need to find somewhere we can actually put down roots, at least for a while." Lyra's scales brightened. "Where?" Roy pulled out the datapad Cross had given him. "The Admiral mentioned the research station is in the outer rim, far from major traffic lanes. That entire sector is sparsely populated. Lots of colony worlds that ask few questions and mind their own business. I'm thinking we find one of those colonies. Small enough that we're not noticed, but large enough that we're not isolated. I set up a proper mechanic shop. You two go to school, make friends, live actual lives." "Can we do that?" Pip asked. "Just settle down?" "I think so. I've got enough credits saved to buy property and start a legitimate business. With proper identification documents, which Cross can help us get, you'll just be two kids of an uncommon species whose parent happens to be human. Unusual, but not impossible. People do cross-species adoptions out in the frontier." The word parent hung in the air between them. Roy realized what he had said and felt his face heat up. "I mean, if you want that. If you're comfortable with that arrangement." Lyra looked at Pip. Pip looked back at Lyra. They had another one of their silent conversations. Then Lyra turned to Roy with a serious expression that was almost comical on her young face. "Among Drakari," she said carefully, "there are formal adoption words. When someone takes responsibility for orphaned younglings, both parties speak their acceptance. The elder says, 'I claim you as my own to protect and guide.' The younglings say, 'I accept your claim, to honor and learn.' Then you're family in the eyes of the clan." "But there is no clan anymore," Pip said quietly. "No," Lyra agreed. "But we can make a new one. Just the three of us." She looked at Roy. "If you're willing." Roy thought about Iris, about the daughter he had lost and the years he had spent alone. He thought about these two strange, brave, impossible children who had somehow crashed into his life and turned everything upside down. He thought about how empty the ship would feel without Pip's drawings on the walls and Lyra's meticulous tool organization. He thought about having a reason to wake up in the morning beyond simple survival. "I claim you as my own," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "To protect and guide." Both girls smiled, their scales glowing softly. Together they said, "We accept your claim to honor and learn." There was no ceremony, no official documentation. Just three beings in a beat-up cargo ship, floating in the emptiness between stars, choosing each other. But it felt like the most important moment of Roy's life. Pip threw her arms around him. "Does this mean we can call you Papa now?" "I've wanted to, but I wasn't sure if I was allowed." Roy's throat closed up. He managed to nod, not trusting his voice. Lyra joined the hug, and they stayed like that for a long time. 3 members of a new clan holding on to each other. 5 years later, Roy stood outside his mechanic shop on the colony world of Freehaven, watching the afternoon traffic of a small frontier town. The shop had done well. People came from 3 sectors over to use his services, because word had spread about the human mechanic, who could fix anything, and his 2 assistants, who somehow made plants grow in impossible conditions and could diagnose engine problems by listening to the harmonics. Lyra was 17 now by human reckoning. She had grown tall and confident, her wings fully healed and strong. She worked as Roy's full partner in the shop, and her modifications to standard ship designs had started attracting attention from manufacturers. Several had offered her positions, but she always declined. Her place was here, she said, with her family. Pip was 14 and had transformed the small plot behind the shop into a garden that was the envy of the colony. She grew hybrid crops that combined Drakari agricultural techniques with human botany, producing yields that shouldn't have been possible. The local farming cooperative had offered to fund her research. She was considering it, but only if she could continue living at home. The rusty Comet sat in the yard, retired from active service but maintained with loving care. It had become a monument, and occasionally a playhouse for the younger children in town who begged Pip to tell them stories about space adventures. Roy heard the shop door open behind him, and turned to see both girls emerge, covered in grease from working on a particularly stubborn cooling system. They were arguing about the best approach to fixing it, their voices animated and engaged. "Papa," Lyra called. "We need your opinion on something." Roy smiled. 5 years, and that word still made his chest feel warm. "What's the problem?" As they explained the technical issue, Roy listened and offered suggestions, but he was only half focused on the problem. The other half of his mind was appreciating this moment, this life, this family they had built from broken pieces. A ship descended toward the landing pad near town, and Roy's old instincts kicked in. He watched it carefully, noting the design and registry. Lyra noticed his attention and touched his arm. "It's okay," she said gently. "We're safe here. You don't have to watch every ship like it's a threat." She was right, but old habits died hard. The ship landed without incident, and Roy relaxed. They were safe here. They had built a life. They had a home. "Come on," Pip said, tugging his sleeve. "Mrs. Rivera is expecting us for dinner, and you know how she gets if we're late." Roy let himself be pulled back toward the house they had built behind the shop. It was small but comfortable, with proper rooms and real furniture and pictures on the walls. Pip's drawings from the ship had been framed and hung with pride. Lyra's first successful engine repair hung in the workshop as a reminder of how far they had come. As they walked inside, Roy glanced back at the rusty Comet one more time. He thought about the day he had opened that hatch and found 2 terrified children in an escape pod. He had never imagined that moment would lead to this. To happiness. To family, to home. The galaxy was still dangerous. The past still lurked in dark corners. But here, on this small colony at the edge of explored space, 3 beings who had been lost had found each other, and that, Roy thought as he closed the door behind his daughters, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.